Hello and welcome to the 14th annual Kosciuszko Spring Symposium. The focus of this year's virtual conference will be security, faith, and resilience in the Intermarium and beyond. Today's virtual symposium is organized by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you are interested in learning more about us, please visit us at iwp.edu. We would like to thank to all of our supporters who make our IWP events program possible. To support the work of IWP, please visit iwp.edu/donate. Today we'll be hearing from Ms. Nathalie Vogel on her lecture titled Latest Developments in Combating Russian Influence Operations in CEE, the examples of Voice of Europe and Storm 1516. Nathalie Vogel is a research fellow at the Center for Intermarium Studies of the Institute of World Politics in Washington. Ms. Vogel studies intelligence responses to hybrid threats. Please welcome Ms. Vogel.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to take part in the Kosciuszko Chair Spring Symposium. In my presentation at the previous symposium, I introduced to you the role of counterintelligence in fighting hybrid warfare in Central Eastern Europe. I mentioned the latest case of close cooperation among intelligence agencies in the 3 Seas region, and that was the case of Voice of Europe. I wanted to give you an update on this case. So today's presentation will have 3 parts. It will provide an update on the latest developments in influence operations that were related to Voice of Europe. In a second part, I will discuss the latest evidence collected by various allies in Central Eastern Europe and confirmed last week by French authorities. They were presented by Viginum. Viginum is the Service de Vigilance et Protection contre les ingérences numériques étrangères, which translates into Vigilance and Protection Service against foreign digital interference. This department is in charge of monitoring current operations in cyberspace. They operate under the office of the Prime Minister. And in the third part, as a conclusion, I will deliver the key takeaways and the lessons learned from these examples. So you will remember that I had mentioned Voice of Europe. What is or was or still is Voice of Europe? Well, it's an information platform that presents itself as an independent digital news channel. It first operated in the Netherlands in 2017. Then it promoted the activities of far-right politicians and far-right activists like Thierry Baudet, and it spread anti-Ukrainian propaganda. And we are not speaking of criticism, and we are not speaking of different opinions. We are speaking the spreading of hardcore propaganda, exacerbating tensions and based on lies. Now, the first question that comes to mind when it comes to Voice of Europe being established in the Netherlands is, why on earth the Netherlands? If you were to pick a location for an influence operation, you would have to have one ability, namely to read the room correctly. And there, I must say, it begs the question why they didn't see the signs on the wall. if you could admit that the Netherlands were very much willing to engage the Russian Federation in the past 15 years ago, economically, politically, and even culturally speaking, it became a different situation after the downing of the Malaysia Airlines, the flight MH17 in 2014. And it's a real trauma for Dutch public opinion. The plane was downed by a Russian Buk, which is a surface air missile. And to give you a scale of the disaster, it carried 298 passengers. They lost their lives. Among these passengers were 80 children and 196 Dutch citizens. And what's more, to give you an idea, on July 25th of 2014, it became known that Maria Putina, who was living in the Netherlands, had to flee, rush out and leave Dutch territory. She had a Dutch partner then, a husband even, and she had to leave very quickly because the mood had changed in the Netherlands. So it begs the question, why on earth did they establish their operations there, especially when you know who you have on the other side, namely on the side of the Dutch, the General Intelligence and Security Service, AIVD. Now this service is an integrated service. You have here the logo down on the right, an integrated service, meaning that it does both foreign intelligence and domestic intelligence. And there is also military service intelligence, the MIVD. Now, the AIVD is a highly respected intelligence service among allies, specifically for its SIGINT work. And to give you an idea, for instance, it's the AIVD that led the operation that identified and attributed the operations of Fancy Bear, the group of Russian hackers, to the Russian Federation, to Russian intelligence, and their actions were monitored live by Dutch intelligence, and these results, of course, greatly benefited the work of the NSA later. So this is not like a small amateur turf. So it became quickly complicated to operate from the Netherlands, I guess, and that's why 2 years later, after being established, they left. And they moved, of all places, to Prague in 2023, where they reappeared, of all places. And speaking of not being able to read the room properly again, they didn't hide in a dark corner in Prague. No, they picked a location of right downtown on Wenceslas Square, which is basically the biggest square downtown, the largest space downtown. And then again, and I have to repeat it, not being able to read the room properly, here is a textbook case. In 2023, the new government, led by Peter Fiala of ODS, a conservative leader, was frankly and openly critical of the Kremlin. Not only that, but supportive of Ukraine. The newly elected president, Petr Pavel, even launched an initiative to collect more and fund more weapons for Ukraine. And he's the highest military officer, the head of the military committee of NATO. And the counterintelligence, the logo is here. BIS was still headed by Major General Michal Kudelka, who is one of the most experienced expert leader of counterintelligence, highly esteemed, and this is not a combo that is exceptionally favorable to operations of influence of the Russian Federation. But be it as it may, they started their operations on Czech soil. They registered Voice of Europe. It was a Polish citizen who registered the Voice of Europe in Prague. He later explained that his identity had been stolen, but anyhow, this explains the involvement of ABW, which is the Internal Security Agency of Poland, which is led by Rafał Kosciuszko. Voice of Europe started immediately and in a quite intense manner its operations. So they started by interviewing a wide range of pro-Kremlin advocates. Sources speak of 19 parliamentarians from 8 countries that were literally working regularly with Voice of Europe. And they, of course, broadcasted short clips of news that were targeting Ukraine, but that were obviously disinformation. When it comes to this list of parliamentarians, it appears that these people were on payroll, and we will see an example later in the presentation. Voice of Europe also established a network of multiplicators and built personal relations to them. The Czech counterintelligence started to work from there with its allies, and there Poland played an important role. Poland is a hub for military supply for Ukraine, so that's why it's very relevant in terms of target of disinformation. And the Polish authorities swiftly carried out searches and eventually found on 2 locations of individuals related to Voice of Europe, both in the cities, both in Tichy and in Warsaw. The sum of 48,500 euros, which equates to $52,400, and on a second location, $36,000 in cash. So this is basically the situation at the start of the activities of Voice of Europe. Thanks to the also here very good intelligence sharing, also with the SBU, the Ukrainian intelligence service, it became clear who was behind the operation. So 2 men were identified. On the left, Viktor Medvedchuk, who is a Ukrainian-born pro-Russian politician who ran his own political party, was a member of a parliament, who is also a media mogul in Ukraine, and basically a tool of for the implementation of the policy of the Kremlin. He's also a close ally of Vladimir Putin, and Putin is the godfather of Medvedchuk's daughter. And on the right, Artyom Marchevsky. Marchevsky was an employee of Medvedchuk. He's a TV producer. He was also a member of the political platform that Medvedchuk ran in Ukraine. Well, thanks to the information, and he's also a dual citizen, Ukraine and Israel. And thanks to the information sharing with the SBU, a complete overview of the criminal activities of both individuals was possible. And what was also possible is after the raids that access was given to computer data and mobile phones, and it enabled the tracing of cash payments, cash flow, and crypto payments. So the Polish network was quickly tackled by AW that were extremely efficient, and the nexus of its operation was identified as a dormant network around the person of Janusz Niedźwiecki, who was at the time already investigated and later was incarcerated on charges of espionage benefiting the Russian Federation. Niedźwiecki is a long-time Kremlin asset who belonged to the Kremlin's pool of fake election monitors, for instance. He also has been instrumental in conducting several infiltration operations, and there appears a name, namely the name of Peter Bistron. Peter Bistron appears in this context as being in the galaxy of Niedzwiecki, because Niedzwiecki had very close contacts and very regular communication with this member of the AfD. This is Peter Bistron. He was first a member of the Bundestag until 2024. As a member of the Bundestag, he was on the Foreign Affairs Committee and on the European Affairs Committee and on different subcommittees, culture and education, only to leave the Bundestag and be elected at the European Parliament. And there he was again on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on the Consumers' Rights Committee, and then on the Labour and Social Affairs Committee. Why does it appear to be important that we discuss this case? Well, because it leads to a certain conundrum. I'm going to explain this later. But in short, Peter Bistron, who is a Bavarian member of the parliament, belongs with Maximilian Krah, another member of the AfD, to a group of MPs who've been extensively traveling to Russia, in the case of Bistron, even to Belarus, where he appeared after an alleged trip to Lithuania and he landed in Belarus, and there were very shady explanations. And then he has been at the center of Russian operations such as fake election monitoring. This group was also involved in monitoring alleged election in occupied territories, by Russian occupied territories in Ukraine. So of course these people are non grata in Ukraine now, and this group, in this case Maximilian Krah, has also been at the center of Chinese espionage cases. So this is an often forgotten dimension of the AfD profile, politically speaking. It's their pro-Chinese stance beside the affinity to the Russian Federation. The leader of the AfD, for instance, Alice Weidel, lived and worked in China and appears to have a soft spot for China. And the Chinese MSS appears to find it extremely easy to have access to the leadership of the AfD. AfD MPs are, of course, regular contributors to Voice of Europe, and they show up in clips as it appears. And to make it worse, BIS scrutiny of Artyom Marchevsky led to a counterintelligence operations, which delivered audio evidence of Peter Bistron being handed over a large sum of money in cash. Bistron is heard on this tape counting the money. So BIS presented the information to the Intelligence Control Committee of the Czech Parliament, and the political reaction was swift. It led to sanctions targeting the channel and its officials. I've listed the sanctions here, so not only Czech sanctions, but also EU sanctions. And eventually, Voice of Europe finally managed to read the room correctly, and they left the Czech Republic and they moved to Kazakhstan. So what are the consequences for Peter Bistron, you might ask? Well, the consequences for Peter Bistron in Germany end up to be an extremely problematic legal situation for the prosecution to tackle. Bistron argues that he's a victim of a witch hunt, but clearly, and by all means, this is not a free speech issue. Unlike what is understood on the other side of the pond, in the case of a political party, this political party, those are people willing to execute infiltration operations for Russians, on behalf of Russians, and also get involved in with Chinese intelligence. The latest case being the aide of the AfD, a member of the European Parliament, Maximilian Krah, who had an aide whose background was known to Maximilian Krah and who was found to be spying for Chinese intelligence. So for Beijing, Maximilian Krah himself entertains regular contacts with cutouts directly related to Russian intelligence. And in the present case, I just explained, an audio tape and a payment received by Peter Bistron in the framework of an influence operation of the Kremlin was busted by Czech intelligence. This has nothing to do with free speech being endangered. This has to do with a threat to national security and the security and sovereignty of allied nations. This is the issue at stake here. So the investigation of Peter Bistron, as I mentioned, has complicated legal consequences. The case is ongoing and it took a long time. Why? Because first of all, the general prosecutor of Bavaria had to deal with long and very complicated procedural issues. We are in Germany, and that's the picture I found to illustrate it on the left, but that pretty much tackles the case. First of all, the protection of members of parliaments is really strong. There is practically no way to monitor the activities of an elected member of parliament, even if you were to be found drinking coffee with an FSB officer at Unter den Linden. It's practically impossible. Members of parliament hold no security clearance in Germany and cannot be screened. The moment they are members of parliament, they are de facto screened. And there is this immunity issue. So in the case of Bistron, he was elected twice. First member of the Bundestag, then they had to lift his immunity to investigate, and then he was re-elected member of the European Parliament, and then this immunity needed to be lifted. And it was the case last week. So this explains why this took 1 year. And the third element, and which is, I think, the most important for us analysts, is the so-called fruit of a poisonous tree problem. Or for the people who like playing German Scrabble, it's a very long word. It's called the Erweitertes Beweisverwertungsverbot. And basically, it's the question whether you can, and if so, how, can you translate evidence gained from, in that case, allied intelligence sharing into evidence for a criminal case. And it's a very complicated issue because it's a challenging question. It's not always possible. The countries that share information sometimes restrict the use of the intelligence they are sharing with their allies. And they specifically say, this information is for you only and not for law enforcement, or not for legal exploitation, or they limit the circle of allies that are supposed to get the information. So for instance, they would share information and they say they would write all NATO countries except Hungary, or all NATO countries except, and they can list whatever. And it's their prerogative as an intelligence, as a counterintelligence service to define how they want to share this information. And in this case, the legal provision on the German side, plus the notion of fruit of the poisonous tree, make the case of Bistron specifically complicated. Now, I am often asked what I think of the handling of the question by BIS, and in general, what I think of Czech intelligence service. And instead of making long speeches, I like to share this picture. In the case of Voice of Europe, we have to deal here with an excellent operation that was swiftly carried out because there were regular interagency updates, good trans-border cooperation, also very good intelligence sharing with also the Ukrainians, but other allies, signals intelligence, and which part that is very important, intergovernmental communication. So there was governmental backing. And my favorite picture, I'm not sure this is quite, you can see, I like to joke that this represents Czech intelligence very well. And I call this picture Major General Koudelka is doing his press reviews. You see the little Czech mouse here reading the newspaper, and here's the Russian cat that wanted to eat the mouse. And that, for me, represents, or that's the epitome of Czech intelligence. Now I would like to move to the second case, which I would like you to have an update on. This is the case of Storm 1516. Storm 1516 is a Russian threat actor carrying out propagandist operations. They do this in carpet bombing the internet with disinformation, and mainly targeting Ukraine, of course, but also strategically targeting European countries, specifically before the elections, with large cyber influence campaigns. Their activities also have targeted US audiences. It is an offspring of the Internet Research Agency of Yevgeny Prigozhin, but they really brought these activities to another level. They create deep fakes using artificial intelligence. Their productions were traced back to St. Petersburg quite immediately. They are also related to CopyCop, which is a malign influence network coordinated by Russian intelligence. A second offspring of this offspring is Storm 1099, and Storm 1099 is a GRU-affiliated influence actor conducting operations that target international supporters of Ukraine since spring 2022. They are known also for their role in the doppelganger websites, forgeries operations, and spreading false information, including claims that Hamas acquired Ukrainian weapons for an attack on Israel. Storm 1099 also amplified the images of the alleged anti-Semitic campaign in Paris. Now, if you take all the activities of Storm 1516 and Storm 1099, it is here clear their activities align with Russia's active measures playbook. Several campaigns of disinformation distributed by Voice of Europe, by the way, originated from Storm 1516 and 1099. And this demonstrates the significant spillover effect in Central Eastern Europe, where such sites are legion. Now, I mentioned the work of Viginum, which they conducted in cooperation with their partners. They started the identification of Storm 1516, and their activity started by a study of the University of Clemson, and a group cooperated also with journalists, and Viginum, the department in charge of monitoring such operations, have just released a report, which you have the source on the right, and I will put it in the comment sections so that you can read the source. The French Agency for Countering Digital Disinformation has analyzed 77 operations of disinformation in the framework of this Storm 1516, and they worked out a 5-level model of operation, which I have reproduced here. I'm not sure it's clear, but as I said, you will have the link in the comments sections. The phase 1 is the phase of preparation, which consists in crafting your own message. So you create the narratives and you hire the actors. And of course, deepfake level modeling is what is being used here. The phase 2 is a distribution, and it concerns the vectors. So you will have specific websites, social media accounts, burner accounts. Burner accounts are only created for a specific operation. And then you will have the phase 3, which is laundering. So you will have paid foreign media and paid social media accounts distributing this information. The amplification happens for the purpose of outreach. So to gain larger outreach, you have specific channels, which you usually find on Telegram. I am surprised I'm not seeing TikTok in this model, which is also quite an amplificator, but also fake social website. And what I find the most interesting really is the level 5, the relays. And the relays serve the purpose of officialization of the narratives. They are spread by official networks such as Russian diplomatic networks, media linked to Russian intelligence, Russian state media, Belarus media, Western policymakers, and Western pro-Russian actors. And here there is this level of respectability that you want to your message to gain a certain legitimacy, but in fact this is quite worrying to see that this model applies almost to all operations that the French experts and their partners have analyzed. So this distribution chain appears to be the smallest common denominator to all operations. As I said, the report is 1 week old, so it's worth having a look. This leads me to my conclusion and my key takeaways. What are my key takeaways? Well, my first takeaway is that Russian influence networks here in Central Eastern Europe change their turfs. They move, but they do not disappear. That is to say that they morph into other influence operations. And this leads to what we call a spillover effect. A campaign never is restricted to the borders of a state. A campaign that is appearing in the Czech Republic will reappear in Hungary and will be transformed and reappear in Romania or in Slovakia. The intelligence services, which we looked into more thoroughly in this part of the presentation, can successfully dismantle influence networks if they are given enough resources and, more importantly, enough political latitude to conduct their counterintelligence operations. That was the case of BIS here with Voice of Europe. And last but not least, a successful counterintelligence operation needs to be translated into legal and political reality to have a valuable deterrence effect. What's the point of smoking out a network of influence if there are no consequences, no sanctions, no assets freezed, no persona non grata declaration, no you name it, raids, etc., etc. You need to tackle the hostile activities by punishing the ones carrying out those operations. This concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention.